and it's sold in roughly 100 retail locations now. And my role was marketing and advertising strategy, sponsored athletes, brand ambassadorships, and managing accounts. Then after that, and I went to library school at Florida State, learned everything I knew from the amazing Trip Wyckoff, who you've probably seen across the bus lib if you follow it. Then I started at Brooklyn Public Library, which has the oldest business plan competition, I believe. It started after 9/11 with City Foundation funding the Power Up Business Plan competition, which is now, I believe, 19 or 18 years old. And Brooklyn Public Library is a system that serves the borough of Brooklyn. It's separate from New York Public and Queens libraries, has 59 branches that serve the 2.6 million residents. And while I was there, I was the team lead for small business, and I worked on developing collections, both, monographic and database collections, programming for entrepreneurs and business owners, outreach. I was an active instructor for the Power Up Business Plan competition, and I co-developed the BKLYN Fashion Academy, which we worked with a number of area partners in the fashion sector to create a application-based cohort model program for aspiring women's wear entrepreneurs that culminated with a fashion show. And now I'm at academic doing entrepreneurship work as well. I'm at San Diego State University, which is a Hispanic serving institution. We have roughly 35% Hispanic student population that is located on Kumeyaay land, 20 miles north of Tijuana. And we are the third oldest member of the California State University system, with the population of roughly 35,000 students. I am the only librarian for the College of Business and the Fowler College of Business and the Payne School of Hospitality Tourism Management. So I work with roughly 6,500 students, undergraduate and graduate, and I work with all of the related university centers, such as our Zon Innovation Platform, which we call ZIP, which is our launch pad for aspiring entrepreneurs of all majors. There's a interdisciplinary entrepreneurship minor, and any student can join the ZIP Launchpad. I'm also currently the assistant head of collection development and management, so I am less involved with the business stuff at the moment, which is unfortunate, but that is a temporary appointment where I'm doing collection strategy, a little bit of ScholComm, kind of whatever's needed at the moment. All right, so now that kind of paints the picture of where I'm coming from and, what my, experiences have been. So that gets me into what I think have been some of my major takeaways for librarians working with entrepreneurs. My first takeaway from being an entrepreneur is that processes matter and are often interdependent. This quote is from an old article from Sloan Management Review called The Process of Organization and Management. It's an old one, but a good one. And I think it summarizes something that I learned really well, which is processes need to be taken into account with which other processes on which they depend, right? So nothing is interdependent. And we learned this the hard way at Flomotion. So we started ramping up production and sales before our trademark was approved. And then we were contested by Adidas, and we were sitting on a bunch of product and a bunch of spent marketing dollars that we didn't know if we were going to get to use, right? So that goes to show that decisions that you make in another process can affect later processes, that there's kind of an order of operations to things, that you need to do things in a certain order and understand that previous decisions can impact decisions that you make in another process. And I guess the way that I think about this for librarians is it's a deeper reference interview. I mean, we all have studied the reference interview and the idea of getting to the underlying question. So understanding what the true information need is. But when you're working with business, you also want to then look at the need before the need. So I put kind of a hypothetical example, right? So if a product business needs financing but doesn't have a strong credit history, then small business finance sources will probably recommend factoring, which is basically invoice lending, because that's based on existing orders and based on the credit history of the buyer, not the supplier. So when you're thinking about that, you go, oh, okay, this may be the financing source, but what process before looking for financing could impact their decisions in factoring? So then you are going to look at the process before that, which is the sales lead generation. And then you're going to think, oh, okay, maybe they need to do research on their client's financial status to choose certain clients that they're going to use those invoices for the lending to get a more favorable rate. Or have they used any of the library sources to see if they can actually get more sales generated than they previously had, like the salesman's guides or Reference USA, which is now Data Axle. So thinking about the need before the need is something that I've really been thinking a lot about when I work with entrepreneurs. Another key takeaway that I use all the time is that advice is easier to come by than you expect, and it can come from people that you would not expect. When I started Flomotion with my business partners, four of us that went to college together, and we were out, pretty nascent entrepreneurs, not a lot of industry experience. We were out kind of making our way, not really knowing what we were doing. And when we were trying to sell to this large client, Maui Knicks, which has 7 surf shops in Florida, the owner said, I'm not going to buy from you guys, but I respect what you're doing and I'm going to mentor you. And then we ended up getting that account later down the road, but we didn't even solicit advice. They offered it straight to us. And then another clothing company in our space ended up eventually connecting us with some of the places where we sourced products from and just mentored us really heavily, which that's the picture in the bottom right. So really, you would think that, people that you're trying to sell to or compete against wouldn't be open to helping you. But I've found that through my experience that was our greatest source of, advice. And I guess when I tried to look at the literature, there's a lot of literature on business networks. I found a great article from Semru and Werner that had a very extensive, literature review that really kind of summed up why I think that this is the case, which is when you're looking at the whole stream of research that started with Coleman's seminal articles in the 80s and early 90s, that dense networks with highly interconnected actors will be beneficial. And I think in action sports, this is really apparent, right? Because then I started to think about it, and Richard Wolcott, who started Volcom, was at Quicksilver. Bob Hurley, who started Hurley, was at Billabong. So you never know. There's a lot of people moving in this small industry, and keeping, making sure that those relationships are good is something that is more important than the immediate sales maybe of that particular company. And that knowledge is free and doesn't, present much risk. So if they're just giving you information and not information that leads to, financial risk or reputational risk through a referral to like a factory, it doesn't hurt the person giving you advice. And that's what happened with the owner of Maui Knicks. He gave us advice because he saw maybe down the road these guys will get their stuff together and then we can buy their things and we'll both make money. But I do think that the librarian application of this is it doesn't hurt to ask. Every time I've worked with, you know, businesses, I'd say, well, you should ask for when you're going out and doing your sales calls, if it doesn't work, ask for advice. What could we have done differently to close the sale? What advice do you give us for talking to other accounts? Networking with other people in their space and asking them for advice. It never hurts to ask. All right, and then my other major takeaway from entrepreneurship that I also put /public because it kind of relates in both spaces is that the importance of business stage and type. I basically mapped out categorically what I thought were our challenges at different stages in startup and growth here. So we had a couple like sales and distribution, the types of sales and distribution challenges we had in startup and growth was different, but categorically we had different challenges at different stages and some that, you know, crossed stages. And business type really impacts these as well, right? So really taking type and stage into consideration when you're working with business and getting that kind of deep reference interview. And I pulled a couple examples from public and put them down there, right? So working with a hot sauce business, right? Then they're going to have labeling issues. Cornell does a great food venture center that runs over all sorts of questions you would have about labeling, right? Then there's going to be government considerations too, like with a mature business like a bar that's selling. There's a different application for transfer of liquor license opposed to, you know, applying for a new liquor license. So these are all things that you're going to have to think about. But basically, knowing how to ask for advice on sources and referrals from industry professionals, knowing that more research is going to be required, and learning about the referrals and programmatic relationships of the sectors in your region and knowing what kinds of industries you're going to get questions about is really, I think, how you're going to get that kind of information. And I know that we're all librarians here, but one of my key public takeaways is I think a lot of business librarians in particular, because, you know, we use proprietary databases as our primary, that monographs are still super relevant. I know that the how to start a business and this, that, or the other, kind of those general entrepreneurship guides are really well understood. The value of those is really well understood. But I think that there's other types of monographs that end up being super useful. And I kind of made a point that you know what you develop. When I was at Brooklyn Public, I spent more on monographs in a month than I do a year at San Diego State. But hyper-specific practical applications, right? Like this how to be a global nonprofit was the silver bullet when I had a question about providing relief efforts in Haiti as a nonprofit and what the financial or legal issues would be. Data discovery is actually something that I also think is really, really useful. I had a LGBTQ plus greeting card company that was looking to expand internationally and trying to figure out what kind of markets would be there. And those are not kind of statistics that you usually see from kind of state entities or, you know, government entities. And I found a book, lo and behold, that gave me some great carrots of what organizations are keeping those kind of stats. I mean, Adams Media handbooks are going to be the place to find IRI data on how many cans of White Claw sold, you know, so books are still really useful in data discovery. Any sports questions, I find really great carrots for statistical sources and in monographs that way as well. So I do think that public allowed me to really understand all of the ways that monographs can be useful in business reference, working with entrepreneurs. There's been a lot of talk about partnerships in the library literature. I quoted the great Small Business in the Public Library book here that was written by Weiss, Surlis, McPhillips, and I believe Malafi. And there's, you know, the key to developing strategic partnerships and future growth is, essential for public libraries, but it is for academic too. And people like Wendy Pothier have written, great wrote a great chapter on this of, the academic library ecosystem. But really most of the literature on partnerships kind of breaks down programming, which can occur in and out of the library, mentor services in and out of the library, research services, either through embedding or referring people back to the library, referral networks of, if you need this, go here, and getting people to refer patrons to the library. But I do think that there are a couple, new directions or approaches for partnerships that can really help with programming and information access. Mark Pond did an excellent discussion yesterday on this topic of crowdfunding sources. At Brooklyn Public, we had Power Up alumni that paid for certain sources, such as the Nielsen add-ons on Simply Analytics. So having some sort of mechanism for financing resources through, people that have participated in programmatic, series like business plan competitions. I think in-kind donations and in-kind memberships is a really great way to get things paid for without a lot of red tape, because you don't have to worry about any of the money moving around. So basically at Brooklyn Public, 6 Point Brewery, Brooklyn Winery, all our Power Up business graduates gave us in-kind food and beverage donations for our programs, right? So seeking support that's not monetary can be really useful. And when we did the BKLYN Fashion Academy, because it was an industry-based cohort model, if you're doing kind of cohort industry sector-based work, which is something that some of our other speakers had talked about, Audrey talked about sectors, and Jen talked about, the ecosystem in their talks yesterday. You can really start trying to solicit different kinds of in-kind donations, right? Because most trade associations have member directories, educational opportunities, gray literature, white papers that are behind a paywall. But if you can go there and say, if you give us free memberships for our cohort of designers, we'll put your name on the marketing materials. That could be a way of getting additional information access at no cost. All right, and then in my current role in collections, I've come even more across this, but we did licensing and access. There Will Be Dragons, and I believe I saw Natasha Arguello was here at this conference yesterday, who wrote a great book an article that I referenced in the intro to licensing for business librarians. This is something that's coming more and more in my radar now, as the picture on the left shows. San Diego State is building an innovation district with P3 partnerships, and that's going to come with more complications with who has access to the products, whether they can be used commercially. And these are things that business librarians and public and academic are really going to have to deal with. I found this amazing proceeding from the Charleston conference, which is referenced here. This kind of framework, qual, is really kind of the basis of all of the discussions that I've had with vendors at both kind of public and academic. And it's really good to think about those negotiations in these kind of frames, but also the articles below are really good intros to things like lib license, kind of boilerplate language from things like the SERU. And this is something that I think is really important to think about. And it's getting more complicated, right? At public, we had a lot of mediated access options. We had single user logins for real estate sources like Property Shark, which now has been problematic in the pandemic, which I know they've gotten around by doing Zoom appointments and then sharing the screen and having the patron walk them through. but there is some, I mean, we ultimately as librarians are collectors and provide access to the collection. So thinking about how to broker these deals is something that has really been a big takeaway for me. And then this kind of slides now into just the academic takeaways. One of the things that I've found that's really interesting since coming to academic libraries, where you have a lot of different kinds of sources that you may not have in public libraries, is that there is a real value to non-business sources. I am a trade journal evangelist, I guess. My mentor, Trip Wyckoff, used to run specialissues.com, which tracked all these buyer guides. And it's been amazing since now I have access to Ulrich's. I'm able to do more searches of where trade journals may live. And this is something that has been pointed out by other business librarians as a useful source as well. I quoted that trade and mass market providers, including magazines, is listed as an important business information provider in the business research competencies. But I pulled a couple examples here. So Chiropractic Economics, which is the trade journal for chiropractors, and I had chiropractor businesses come to me at Brooklyn Public. I didn't have access to this or knew that it, free database or that database access existed to this because the public library didn't have CNOL, which is a nursing database. And these kind of broader article aggregators that aren't, Business Source or ABI may be worth looking into too, like Woodworkers Journal, which we have a lot of van life businesses in California that are interested in building vans for people to live in or to do luxury camping with. And Woodworkers Journal is where you get trends on what kinds of woodworking projects and techniques and buyer's guides for tools, right? Which is really useful for some of those businesses.
Sorry, Tim, that's your 1 minute warning, now more like a 45-second warning.
All right. So then this actually also applies to databases as well, right? So you've got, for any sort of prototyping, you're going to look at IEEE or ASM for people that are building those kinds of product businesses. Things like Sage Research Methods and Safari Tech Books are great practical guides for doing market validation research, which is something that was talked about earlier in this conference. And the last takeaway I have from academic is what I call high impact practices equals high engagement. And that's basically that anything that you're working in a learning community, capstone projects, or collaborative assignments is where you're going to get the most engagement from your entrepreneurs. And it works for student persistence, like our keynote speaker from yesterday talked about, of how these things impact student persistence. And framing entrepreneurship in high impact practices is a way to talk to academics about entrepreneurship that doesn't get controversial. So here's my list of references, and now I will open the floor up to questions. So you'll get this slide deck, but this was just more kind of a crash course in what I think I've learned that's been useful since doing this across these different settings.
Thank you, Tim. That was fascinating. There was some discussion. Jillian, would you mind sharing? I think there was a question.
Thank you so much, Timothy. That was really great. Couple questions came through on the chat. The first one is, what is the source that Timothy referenced for the CUAL framework?
Okay, that actually came from it is in the reference list. That came from a proceeding at the Charleston conference. And the Charleston so when you get the slide deck, that will be in that list, in the reference list, as well as mentioned. But the Charleston conference really is the collections conference. So if you have any questions about licensing or collections, that's the place to look.
We also have a lot of love for trade journals, so you are not alone in that. We have a couple of people who are mentioning that students can ask for discounts, student discounts, so it's a good tip. And Wendy made a really good point here at the end. She said, listening to Tim talk, it would be fun to have an entrepreneur boot camp for librarians. We have time for maybe one more question as well, if anyone wants to drop that in, and Tim can make his last couple comments. All right, if there are no further questions. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tim, I see you.
Oh, no, thank you. I very much appreciate getting the chance to talk to you.
Good, I'm gonna turn it back over to Carrie.
Thank you, Jillian, and thank you, Tim. That was fascinating. You're giving me all the Brooklyn Public Library memories of Walt Whitman and Clinton Hill Branch forever. Okay. So our next and final presentation of the conference is kudos to Allison, Cruse, and Ophelia Chapman, presenting Good Things Happen to Those Who Side Hustle, supporting student sidepreneurship in the academic library. Allison Cruse, she, her, is the business liaison librarian at Western Carolina University in the mountains of North Carolina. She is an early career librarian, reformed commercial banking analyst, and dedicated sidepreneur. Ophelia Chapman, she, her, is the business and communications studies librarian at Randall Library at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. Her liaison areas include all departments at Cameron School of Business and the Department of Communication Studies. Prior to becoming the business librarian, she was IT librarian at Chestnut Library, Lafayette State University at Fayetteville, North Carolina. Her current interests include entrepreneurship with a focus on the entrepreneurship process and digital entrepreneurship. Take it away.
All right, hopefully you guys can all see my screen and hear me. I assume someone will tell me. If you can't,
loud and clear.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having us here today. Thank you for letting us be the last people to present. I hope that we can end this thing on a high note. There's been so many amazing presentations, so thanks for having us. Yeah, we're here to talk about the good things that happen to students who side hustle and talk about sidepreneurship, specifically what we're doing to support that within the academic library. So a little sneak peek what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk some about some of the terms that we're going to use, make sure we're kind of all on the same page with the way that we're defining some terms and who this specific patron type is. Then we're going to talk about what we in the academic library community are currently doing to support this very specific type of entrepreneur. And then we're hoping to have some discussion here at the end about what we can or maybe should be doing to continue to provide additional support for these patrons going forward into the future. So just quickly who we are, Ophelia Chapman and I will be presenting today, but major shout out to Summer Krasevska, who also was a major part of putting this project together. She's not presenting with us, you all saw her earlier today, but she was a major part of this, so just thought we'd share that. So jumping right in here, there are so many different terms that kind of touch on the type of patron, the type of entrepreneur that we're talking about today. Side hustle, gig work, freelancing, of course, these are all terms that we all know and use. In fact, I think a vast majority of the presentations that we've seen in the past 2 days have sort of touched on these concepts in some form or fashion. So it's definitely a hot topic. One of the terms that our group sort of discovered and fell in love with was sidepreneur, which is defined as entrepreneurs who are running a business on a part-time basis. So whether that's kind of a standalone thing with, you know, you've got like a stay-at-home parent situation who also runs a little side business, or it's somebody doing this in addition to their full-time job or full-time school responsibilities. We kind of fell in love with sidepreneurship as a concept. So you're going to hear us say that a lot. A couple of quick distinctions about, again, the more specific type of patron that we're talking about. There are probably as many motivations for participating in the gig economy or, you know, side hustles as there are different terms that can be used for this sort of thing. So we're specifically talking about those individuals with that true sort of entrepreneurial spirit. They're looking to start a business. That's their primary motivation for wanting to participate in these things, as opposed to any of the other number of reasons that someone might want to. And then also another distinction that we'll get into a little bit here is that when we talk about kind of air quotes small business, that what we're really talking about is something much, much more granular, which is the micro business. So there are several different definitions of what a micro business is specifically kind of floating around out there, but there were a few commonalities that we sort of gathered and said, this is what we're going to use as our basis for definition. So kind of the 4 hallmarks of what a micro business is. So first of all, it's going to be owner operated. A lot of times it is solely operated by the owner, but the owner is always going to be a major part of the micro business. When there are employees, we're looking at situations where there are 5 or less employees total, and that of course includes our owner operator. So small, very small group of people. We're looking at annual revenues up to 250,000. So a lot of these businesses, of course, are generating far less than that, but we are also looking at businesses that are either starting at this point and growing, or really could be a very comfortable living or standalone business at some point in time for that owner operator at that 250 revenue point. And then the other sort of hallmark that we're looking at here is really minimal startup capital. A lot of these are going to be home-based businesses. They're going to start based on, a few extra dollars or a little bit of savings. These are not things where we've got major capital expenditures right out the gate or major funding needs. So a few sort of examples. I'm sure most of you are familiar with all of these things, but we just wanted to make sure that we're sort of looking at how large a scope can exist here. So micro businesses can be anything from e-commerce, so selling vintage clothing on a website like Etsy. Could be making artisanal goods, like making soaps or candles that you sell at a local market, or also online. Services, any number of services, like a dog walking or a pet sitting business, those sorts of things. Or any kind of freelance work where you're offering services like graphic design or building websites for private clients. All of those are different types of things that often start and stay at the micro business level, and often start as sort of side hustles for people. But of course, this can take about 1 billion different shapes, but these are a few examples. So we were hoping that you could humor us, and we'll do a little poll. And if you guys can just throw responses into chat, and then Jillian, if you can tell me, because I can't see chat at the moment, but kind of what comes up here. We're curious what you think the percentage of US firms that are classified as micro businesses.
We are getting a lot of C's right now.
72%, okay.
And now we're getting a couple of mixes. We got 2 D's and 1 B.
Okay, so most people are guessing 72% of US firms are micro businesses.
Correct.
All right. It's actually D, 91% of US firms are considered micro enterprises. So we're talking about a massive force in the US economy. In fact, according to the Association of Enterprise Opportunity, there are 24.7 million micro enterprises in the US, contributing $2 trillion a year to our annual US economy. And that's representing 30 million jobs, both to the owners and their employees. So again, they're very tiny businesses, but they have a massive impact on our economy and on the business landscape. Just because we can't get enough of stats, so we'll give you some more. Some 5-year growth rates that are pretty interesting. When we look at the growth in this sidepreneur category, so again, these people who are starting their businesses as a side hustle or on a part-time basis, we're seeing significant growth over the last 5 years as compared to what we would consider traditional entrepreneurship. We're seeing especially notable increases in that sidepreneurship field among women-owned businesses, and then even more specifically around Black women-owned businesses. So it seems like the trend has been building for people to sort of take this side side approach into entrepreneurship, and we would expect to see that to continue. So one more part here, hoping not to completely belabor this point, but when we talk again about the difference between a micro business and small business, because I think a lot of us as academic librarians, we support small business and we talk about these things frequently, but what we might kind of be leaving out in terms of what we're looking at for this more micro demographic is kind of the way small business is defined and how broad a term that is. So for instance, if we look at the Small Business Administration and what they consider thresholds for small, again, air quote, small business, they're pretty significant. The Small Business Administration classifies based on NAICS code, either annual receipts or number of employees, depending on the type of industry. So if I'm running a pet care business, again, I'm running a pet care service, I can have up to 8 million in annual receipts and still be considered a small business based on SBA standards, which I thought was pretty crazy. That's a rather big business to me. Same with soap manufacturing. If I'm making handmade soaps, I can have up to 1,000 employees and still meet that small business cap. So again, we just really wanted to drive home that we're talking about a very specific subset of small business here with these micro businesses, you know, that are maxing out at that 250 in receipts. So what does this have to do with anything at all? What does this have to do with the academic library at all? When we started working on this project together, the three of us, we all sort of agreed that we thought this was a really cool idea. Like sidepreneurship is this cool term and an interesting trend, but we all agreed that none of the three of us were actively doing anything to support this specific entrepreneur type. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to my partner, Ophelia Chapman, and she is going to tell you why this matters to you.
Thank you, Allison. Okay, so in reviewing the literature, what we categorized what we found into 3 buckets. So the first one was a focus on library literature on micro enterprises. What we found was that there was a lot of literature on small businesses, but very limited literature on micro enterprises. In terms of public libraries, what we found was that public libraries are actually programming and have resources to support sidepreneurs, but it's still not a lot out there. We could do more. And then we looked at lib guides or subject guides in academic libraries, or generally all libraries. And what we found was that there was some lib guides out there, but it's very, very limited. And so what did we do? As librarians, we went out there again and tried to survey librarians and find out what we are currently doing in terms of micro businesses. And what our analysis showed was that there is 75% public library support in sidepreneurship. And then we also found out that there is 83% support. 83% academic libraries are not actively supporting sidepreneurs. And then we had a small percentage of librarians who said that they are either not interested or not, you know, it's not, they did not see value in it. Okay, so then we tried to, again, categorize what the needs of this particular group would be. And so for most needs that we found for sidepreneurs, centered on market and industry research. And then we also found that there was a need for competitive analysis, and basic like tax support also was out there. In between, we found that there was need for traditional business plans and also some legal support as well. What we didn't find much on that this group needed was funding and strategic planning. Of course, they start out small, and so minimal money that they need. So they are not out there looking for support in this for funding. And so we looked in academic libraries to try to find what people are currently doing. And like Allison had mentioned earlier on, there are different names that has been given to micro businesses. And so some of the subject guides that we found, as you can see here, are on freelancing, gig economy, share economy, and whatever. We found few out here, but under different names. In terms of programming, we did not find much, but Colorado State University had actually planned a sidepreneurship program, which was in collaboration with Money Smart Week, that was going to be put out in April of this year, but COVID happened and it was postponed. So it actually didn't happen, but they had planned for it. So kudos, Colorado State University. So then we talked about what can we do to improve our support in this area. So again, we put it in 3 buckets. We can expand what we are doing now, we can explore, and we can partner. And so in terms of expansion, we talked about LibGuides. What can we do if we could go out there and specifically work, intentionally work on putting out LibGuides in that area? That could be good in supporting sidepreneurship. We also talked about collection development and program or research consultation. We could offer that. In terms of exploring, we talked about what we can do with faculty. We actually went out and talked to some faculty and tried to find out what they are doing to support this in their curriculums to support for this area. And what we found was that faculty is actually thinking about it also. And I was fortunate to attend a conference last month by the Southern Management Association, and there were actually 2 programs that were 2 sessions that were actually focused on looking at the curriculum now that they could do to support micro businesses. In terms of partnership, we can continue to do what we are doing, partnering with local organizations like small business centers, small business development and technology centers, innovation centers, and other associations. Now, that our next slide is going to ask for what you thought about what we can do to best support this area. But I want to preface that with the fact that yesterday, if you got a chance to listen to our pitch competitors, every one of those 5 competitors touched on micro businesses. So I would preface with that and open up the floor for a discussion on what we have just presented.
You can feel free to add your thoughts to the chat. I'm happy to read them off. Jennifer says, as a member of the Faculty Senate, I push to have the campus policy change so students can run a business while living on campus.
Yeah, that would be awesome. There's so many opportunities for sidepreneurship that really can be conveniently run out of a dorm.
They were afraid of drug dealers. That's what the
Legal
campus told me.
businesses. Legal businesses only.
Our library has been fortunate to have she was a member of our staff. She retired now, but she had a side hustle with on Etsy. And she would come in and do programs and show people how to photograph their products. And people could bring in an example and she would work with them. And just something, well, she started off the program explaining how the system worked. And then the next part was how to photograph your products. And this was so helpful to so many different people because a lot of them didn't have a way, you know, that venue for selling whatever it was that they were making. So I thought that was a great program to provide to the public.
And Mimi, you're at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Public Library, correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the public libraries are so far ahead of academia on supporting micro enterprise and providing programming and support, which you guys are all the best. You do such great work. So we're trying to find out whether or not people within the academic library see value in providing specific support. I don't know that there's consensus maybe that we should be providing this type of support, or maybe it's something that's better housed elsewhere and we should really be focusing on those partnerships with our friends in public libraries, or if this is something that we can and should be bringing into our institutions.
So Summer has mentioned that Wake was encouraging students to try starting a micro business during quarantine because internships were uncertain and even securing jobs. Tim mentions that he used to go to the Freelancers Union Spark meetings to promote the library in Brooklyn. And he also mentioned that to Jennifer's point, asking small businesses to take students as interns so they can see what it's like to run a business. He says that's what he did as a small business at Flomotion.
Awesome, thank you.
One thing that we did too was contact the career services to find out if they are doing anything to support students who are trying to start a business instead of going to work in a traditional company. And we found that there was no support for that. So maybe that's one avenue that we could explore and work with career centers around our institutions.
And we've certainly talked amongst ourselves as well about some of those transferable skills that kind of, again, having that entrepreneurial mindset or going out and starting some of these things for yourself, even if the desire isn't to be a long-term entrepreneur, that in uncertain economic times, those are great things to be able to put on a resume, skills that you're able to demonstrate through sort of unconventional means by running a side hustle.
I think it would be very cool for the universities to go out and tap those mid-range companies, not the huge ones and not the teeny tiny ones, but the ones that are in the middle, and have some kind of a program that talks about internships and mentoring, and then challenge them to mentor a student or a person who is interested in starting their own business. I think that would be an ask that would be impressive to them, to be, for a university to reach out to them, to include them in that kind of a program. It would also be an asset for the university that as that company grew, they might become more involved with the university.
I love that, Mimi. I just wrote it down. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Jennifer also put into the chat that she thinks it's valuable but difficult to identify routes to ID students. She says we have student entrepreneur clubs, but it gets a very little uptake. And Morgan actually, and I agree with her as another academic librarian, said that she would love to see academic librarians support micro businesses. She gets a lot of college students at the public library wanting to do market research. And there are a few people agreeing with her. I agree with her as well. And then Jennifer also said she would love to work with more of those kinds of students, and she'll have to check out the public library to ensure they're sending them back to her.
Yeah, this is a great sort of partnership networking opportunity between the local public libraries and the universities to kind of share the wealth here and make sure everyone's getting the support that they need.
And Kim has a really cool comment in here. She says, we have an academic library branch inside our public library, but not seeing students there enough for this purpose. And Jennifer, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I was checking to see how much time we had, but this is awesome conversation. Thank you.
No, of course, 5 minutes. And Jennifer said,
we just kind of blended through from the conversation to the Q&A. So you're doing great.
Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Jennifer said, create network regional business groups like BLINK or BIF to refer to each other.
This is definitely, as a member and director of BLINK, this is something that's definitely on our radar in the state of North Carolina. So other BLINK members, be prepared to hear about this again.
And Tim just mentioned that they started one for CSU. And Mark Pond said a partnership in the route to go for sure. It allows the university to refer folks to him as a public library who can't access the university's resources because of licensing restrictions.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any more questions? We've got a few more minutes.
Sure, there's all of our contact information. If anyone wants to chat about micro business, we're all
Thank you so much. This is a great presentation, and it was definitely worth the wait. Thank you for carrying us out of the conference on this topic. Was very, very interesting. If you don't mind dropping your emails in the chat, then people will have that record as well, and everyone can save the chat. There's been so many great ideas, and the chat is an eco-friendly alternative to the sticky notes that Morgan's got now stuck across her whole desk and wall. So thank you again for everyone. We have the happy hour, the final networking session coming up, and hope to see some of you there. And thank you again to our presenters, to Tim and Allison and Ophelia and Summer as well in absentia. So thank you so much to everyone, and looking forward to seeing you in the happy hour in a few minutes. If there are extra questions and people are sticking around, then go ahead.